The wind had a voice that night. It screamed across the plains like a wounded animal, ripping through the rafters of Tobias Redmont's weather-worn cabin. Rain pelted the shutters and sheets, and lightning split the sky with a fury that made even the cattle in the barn moan low with unease. Inside, Tobias sat still as he had most nights for the past 8 years alone by the fire, stitching an old bridle back together, pretending the leather hadn't outlived its purpose. He didn't expect company. He never did. That's why when the pounding started, sharp, frantic, not the knock of a neighbor but of desperation, he didn't rise. He just listened. The second knock came harder. Then came the voices, not English, but Apache. Words he hadn't heard in nearly a decade. Words that once filled the air of his happiest memories. Words that also haunted the worst morning of his life. His body moved before his mind caught up, one hand on the rifle above the mantel, the other trembling. Apache at his door, at night, in a storm. Last time that happened, his wife and daughter died screaming. And yet, these voices weren't shouting war cries. They weren't men. They were women, pleading. One voice rose above the others. Please, we know you're there. We need shelter, just for tonight. Tobias's heart beat once, twice, then dropped into silence, because in the shadows beyond his fence line, he could feel its riders approaching, and if he opened that door, there would be no turning back. Tonight, everything would change. Tobias didn't open the door right away. He stood there, frozen in the orange flicker of firelight, palm pressed to the thick oak, listening to the voices on the other side. Women, definitely. Apache, definitely. Their tone wasn't angry or demanding, it was desperate. One of them spoke again, this time in halting English. Each syllable scraped against the wood like a blade. We know you are there. If you do not help us, we will die out here. He closed his eyes. 8 years ago, he'd trusted a voice at the door, a voice that had smiled while hiding a rifle. He buried his wife and child that same dawn. Since then, he hadn't opened that door for anyone. But tonight, something felt different. His fingers hovered over the iron bar that locked the door. Behind him, the fire cracked. Outside, the wind howled. In his memory, Sarah's voice whispered, kindness is what makes us human, Tobias. He slid the bar free, slowly, reluctantly. The hinges groaned as the door opened. They stood huddled together under the slant of his porch roof, 9 Apache women, soaked to the bone, their dresses heavy with rain and mud. Some bled from shallow wounds. One clutched a silent baby swaddled in a wet blanket. Another leaned on a younger girl barely able to stand. And in the middle stood the speaker, tall, proud, chin lifted, despite the gash above her eye. I am Ayana, she said. These are my sisters, my daughters, my people. We have been running for 3 days. Tobias didn't speak. He didn't ask what they were running from. He could guess. Soldiers didn't need a reason to hunt anymore. They called it pacifying the territory. But what they meant was burning villages. He stepped aside. They moved quickly, silently, like shadows into the warmth of the cabin. The scent of blood, wet earth, and fear followed them in. Ayana paused as the last entered. The ones chasing us? They are not far. An hour, maybe less. Tobias rebarred the door and turned. His home felt smaller now. For years it had been a tomb, quiet, empty, untouched. Now it pulsed with breath and quiet pain. He looked at Ayana. Why are they hunting you? Her face didn't flinch. Because we lived when they expected us to die. Because we ran when they told us to kneel. And because one of their officers wants no witnesses to what he did to my youngest sister. Tobias felt something cold settle in his gut. He'd known officers like that. Men who used uniforms to hide the rot underneath. How many are coming, he asked. 8, she replied. Maybe 9. Led by a man named Morrison. Tobias turned to the window, peering into the storm. No shapes yet, but that meant nothing. Killers like Morrison didn't announce themselves. He turned back. There's a cellar beneath the kitchen, stone-lined, hidden, might hold all of you. Ayana shook her head. If they find us, you die too. We will not drag you into our fight. He laughed once. It was bitter. You're 8 years too late for that. I became their enemy the day they made me bury my family. A low rumble of thunder rolled across the plains. Tobias moved to the hearth and retrieved his rifle, an old Winchester, cleaned every week, though he'd sworn never to use it again. As he checked the chamber, he noticed the women weren't just huddling for warmth, they were tending wounds, binding cuts with scraps of cloth, organizing without words. Survivors, not helpless refugees. Ayana watched him from across the room. You used to be a soldier, she asked. I used to be a lot of things, he answered. None of them kind. Ayana said nothing, but her eyes held something understanding, maybe, or warning. Then came the sound that turned the air to glass, distant hooves slapping through wet mud. Tobias stiffened. The baby whimpered. No one moved. Outside, death was closing in. Ayana approached him. We should hide, she whispered. Tobias hesitated. Hiding was safe, predictable, cowardly. But then he saw the youngest girl among them clutching the baby tighter, rocking slightly, whispering some soft chant in her native tongue. No, Tobias said. We don't run tonight. Ayana raised an eyebrow. Then what do? We let them come, and we show them they were wrong to think this was easy. The women exchanged glances. One of them stepped forward and removed a blade from beneath her torn dress. Another rolled up her sleeve to reveal a burn scar shaped like a military insignia. They weren't just survivors. They were warriors who had endured the worst and were still standing. You're not who you seemed at the door, Tobias said. Ayana replied, Neither were you. A silence passed between them, not of fear, but of reckoning. Tobias walked to the corner and pulled up a loose floorboard. Beneath it, wrapped in oilskin and memory, was a pouch of ammunition and a map etched with defensive positions around the ranch. Lines he'd drawn years ago, not to defend himself from war, but from the ghosts of one. We make our stand here, he said. This ranch sits high. The road bends east at the fence line. They'll come from there. If we're quiet, we can catch them before they breach the porch. Ayana nodded slowly. Then we set the stage. They moved fast. Furniture overturned. Shutters barred. Traps laid beneath windows. The fire dimmed to cast longer shadows. Tobias handed out knives, ropes, whatever tools he had. The women moved with practiced grace, speaking in whispers, setting a rhythm born of shared trauma. Then another sound. Closer now. Voices. A man called out through the wind, smug and sure. I know you're in there. Come out now, and we'll make this quick. Captain Morrison. Ayana's mouth twisted in disgust. He always liked to talk before killing. Tobias positioned himself near the front window, rifle barrel resting just under the sill. The others spread throughout the house, some near the back, some above in the attic crawl space. They were ready. Ayana crouched beside Tobias and handed him something, a small mirror, polished clean. When I flash this, she whispered, you take Morrison, we'll handle the rest. Before he could respond, another voice, younger, uncertain, spoke in the storm. Captain, maybe we're wrong. Maybe it's just some old rancher. Morrison's laugh cut through the wind like a knife. Private, those tracks led straight here. 9 women, bleeding. I can smell their fear. They're inside. And so is the fool who took them in. Tobias felt the old coldness settle over him, that clear, sharp feeling just before things broke. Sarah's voice came again, quiet in his mind. Kindness doesn't always wear soft hands. Then a flicker of light. Ayana's mirror caught the fire's glow and sent a narrow beam toward the front window. That was the signal. Tobias moved like he had in the war, one smooth motion, no hesitation. His rifle snapped up, crosshairs locking onto Morrison, just as the captain raised a boot to kick in the door. But Tobias didn't fire, because Ayana was already there. She appeared behind Morrison like a wraith, her blade flashing in the rain. One slash clean and silent. Morrison staggered, dropped his rifle, hands pressed to the wound at his ribs. "This is for my sister," she whispered. Then she drove the blade deeper. Morrison collapsed into the mud, mouth open in a silent scream. Ayana let him fall face first. Inside the house, chaos ignited. Two soldiers burst through the back, only to be met by an iron pan swung full force into one man's skull. The other tripped a wire and landed in a nest of sharpened nails Tobias had hidden beneath a rug. Screams filled the storm. But it wasn't one-sided. One of the Apache women took a bullet to the shoulder, spinning her backward. Another was caught in a scuffle and thrown hard against the fireplace stones. Blood ran down her brow, but she rose again, blade in hand. From the dark outside came new voices, reinforcements. Morrison hadn't come alone. Torches lit up the hillside, a dozen riders, maybe more, descending the slope like phantoms on horseback. One voice barked orders with a tone sharper than the rain. "Form ranks! Secure the perimeter!" Ayana's face turned grim. "That's not a squad," she said. "That's a company." Tobias cursed under his breath. He was just the tip. A new voice echoed across the night, louder and colder. "This is Colonel Bradley. You are surrounded. Surrender now or we burn this place to ash." Ayana stepped to the door. "We have your son," she called out. Silence fell. Even the rain seemed to pause. Tobias blinked. "Your son?" Ayana nodded. "He came through the back. Thought he was clever. Now he's in our cellar, tied and trembling." Bradley's voice broke again, but now with a tremor. "Release him. We can talk terms." Ayana's reply was ice. "There are no terms, only truth." Tobias moved quickly through the cabin. The wounded were being tended. The baby, somehow still asleep, was wrapped tight in a fresh blanket near the hearth. Ayana met his eyes. "We can't win this fight!" Tobias looked back toward the torches climbing the ridge. "No," he said, "but we can make them remember it." She studied him for a moment, then offered a grim nod. "Then let's make it count." Inside the cabin, Tobias could feel the shift. The air had weight now, not just from the storm, but from what was coming. Colonel Bradley wasn't like Morrison. He wasn't a man who needed to shout to be dangerous. He issued warnings like death, gave instructions calm, certain, final. Ayana stared out the window, her knife still dripped with Morrison's blood. Tobias reloaded his rifle in silence, then crossed to the cabinet beneath the stairs. From behind a hidden panel, he pulled out a bundle wrapped in waxed cloth. Inside, dynamite, fuses, the last remnants of a life he had sealed away. He had used these tools to build railroads through mountains. Later, during darker times, to tear things down that needed destroying, he unwrapped them with steady hands. Ayana turned to him. "We destroy the ranch? If we detonate the dam above the valley," he said, "we flood the entire approach. They're riding in low. It'll drown every man on that hill." "And us?" she asked. Tobias hesitated. "If we time it right, we escape along the ridge trail. If not—" Ayana nodded slowly. "Then we become the flood." But before they could finish planning, a new sound sliced through the night. A baby's cry, but not from inside the cabin, from outside. Faint, desperate, and close. Ayana froze. That's not ours. Tobias stood, heart sinking. He knew that sound, knew it in his bones. It wasn't a trick, it was real. Somewhere between them and Bradley's advancing troops, a child, maybe two, was caught in the crossfire. No, he muttered, they brought civilians. Ayana's jaw clenched. They want to use the baby against us? Or maybe they brought their own, Tobias said. Maybe someone thought this was just a routine arrest. Brought a laundress, a cook, someone who didn't know what kind of fire they were walking into. The plan to flood the valley faltered in his mind. He saw the water rising, saw it sweeping away not just soldiers but innocents, saw a baby's cry go silent beneath 10 feet of storm-fed death. We can't do it, he said. Ayana turned sharply. If we don't, they'll come through the front and burn us alive. I'll find the baby, Tobias said. I'll get her out. Then we do what we must. Ayana didn't argue. She just nodded, then turned and began giving orders to the women behind her. Tobias slid into his coat, slung the rifle over his shoulder, and slipped out the rear door into the rain. The night wrapped around him like a second skin. The storm had softened to a cold drizzle, but the ground was slick with mud. He moved fast, low, eyes searching. There a supply wagon, maybe 40 yards from the main camp. And beside it, a figure hunched, holding something close. A woman, young, barefoot. She wasn't armed. Tobias crept closer, every step a negotiation with the mud. His rifle remained low, safety off, eyes darting between the campfires and sentries. The woman hadn't seen him yet. She rocked the bundle in her arms, whispering something soft, something only a mother would know how to say in the middle of a war. Then movement. A guard passed near the wagon, pausing when he saw her. You shouldn't be here, the soldier hissed. Get back to the camp. The woman turned, frightened but defiant. She's cold, she said. She won't stop crying. You want to get shot? The soldier snapped. We're about to storm that cabin. Tobias used the distraction. He moved to the blind side of the cart, waited for the soldier to step away, then rose up behind him and brought the butt of his rifle down hard. The man dropped without a sound. The woman gasped and pulled the baby closer. Easy, Tobias said, raising a hand. I'm not here to hurt you. She stared at him, eyes wide, cheeks flushed from the cold. Who are you? Name's Tobias. I own that cabin you're about to watch burn. You need to leave. Now. I can't, she said. They said they'd hang anyone who disobeyed. Who are you? Mary Hendricks. I cooked for them. I didn't know what this was. Tobias looked at the baby. A girl. No more than a few months old. She blinked at him with enormous dark eyes, her lips trembling from the cold. You came with them thinking it was routine. Mary nodded, shame painting her expression. They said it was just a recovery mission, that the women had stolen livestock, horses. Tobias felt his teeth clench. Morrison had lied to everyone, even his own. I'm going to give you a chance, he said. In a moment, the shooting's going to start. When it does, you run. Head toward the grove of sycamores. There's a trading post 5 miles downriver. Mary looked toward the shadows. They'll shoot me. Not if they're too busy dying. She didn't ask what he meant. She just nodded and pulled the baby closer. Suddenly a voice rang out across the hillside. We're out of time. Tobias turned. From the cabin, gunshots erupted like firecrackers thrown into dry grass. Ayana's group had started the assault. The soldiers, caught off guard, began to shout and scramble. Tobias grabbed Mary's shoulder. Now! She bolted into the dark, slipping between the wagons like a ghost. The baby didn't cry this time, just blinked up at the man who had spared her. Tobias turned to go, then froze. 2 more soldiers. They hadn't seen Mary, they saw him. Hey! He fired once. The first man dropped. The second lunged, but before he could raise his weapon, 2 Apache women emerged from the brush. Silent, fast, lethal. One drove a blade into the man's gut. The other slit his throat before he could scream. It was over in seconds. Tobias nodded to them. They nodded back, then vanished into the dark. Back at the cabin, the flames were growing not from fire, but fury. Ayana's defense was working. The soldiers were confused, divided, some fleeing back toward the camp where their commander waited. And that commander, Colonel Bradley, had just realized his son was missing. By the time Tobias returned to the cabin, the air smelled of gunpowder and rain-soaked blood. Smoke curled from the muzzle of his rifle. Near the hearth, one of the Apache women lay on the floor, cradled by her sister. Her breath was shallow. Another had a gash down her forearm, but her eyes burned with fire. They had held the line barely. Ayana stood over a boy in a lieutenant's uniform, a blade pressed just under his chin. Her hand was steady. The boy was pale, shaking, eyes wide with disbelief. "This is Colonel Bradley's son," she said when Tobias entered. "He tried to flank us, thought he'd be clever. Now he's a hostage." Tobias stared at the young man. 19, maybe 20, arrogant blood dripping from a nervous mouth. "You know what your men are doing out there?" he asked. I thought we were securing hostile territory," the boy stammered. Ayana's jaw tightened. "They burned our village. They murdered children. Your father signed the orders." The lieutenant blinked rapidly, trying to process the world unraveling around him. "I didn't know." "But you're here," Tobias said, "with a weapon, with their flag on your chest." "Because I believed him," the boy shouted. "I believed in the mission." Ayana leaned in closer. "Then believe this. If you want to live, you'll be the voice that ends him." The boy didn't respond. He was trembling now. Outside, Colonel Bradley's voice came again, full of fury, barely masking fear. "Release my son and we can talk. I'll grant you safe passage. No more blood has to be spilled tonight." Tobias laughed. "He's losing control." Ayana nodded. "He's bluffing." But Tobias saw something else in opportunity. "We don't kill the boy," he said. "We send him out." "What?" Ayana snapped. "He is guilty. He's a witness, a weapon. If he talks, if he testifies to what he saw tonight, it doesn't just end this raid, it ends Bradley, and maybe all of them." The cabin fell silent. Even the storm seemed to pause. Ayana stared at Tobias, the blade still at the boy's throat. "You think one voice will matter?" "His father does," Tobias said. "That's why he's still shouting instead of charging. He's afraid." Ayana looked down at the boy. "Will you speak?" The lieutenant swallowed hard, then nodded once. Outside more sounds, but not from Bradley's men. New voices, new orders. Tobias ran to the window, torches in the distance, but carried differently, no military precision, more like lawmen. He squinted. A badge flashed. "Federal marshals," he whispered. Ayana's eyes widened. Someone came. "They heard the storm," Tobias said. "Or maybe someone sent word. Either way, help is here." The boy looked up. "If I testify, what happens to my father?" Tobias met his eyes. "He falls." The lieutenant closed his eyes and nodded. Dawn broke like a soft exhale over the hills, not with glory, but with the aching quiet that follows survival. Golden light spilled across Tobias Redmont's ruined porch, catching on broken boards, blood-stained earth, and the lifeless forms of men who had come thinking this would be easy. Colonel Bradley stood in chains. He was no longer the voice commanding the storm, but a hollowed-out man surrounded by the very truth he had tried to bury. His son sat nearby, silent, pale, his confession echoing in the notebooks of federal marshals who had arrived during the last hour of the night, drawn by suspicions, by reports, by the scream of justice that had finally reached their ears. They had heard everything: the raids, the lies, the murders labeled as orders, and the cover-up that had spread like infection through the chain of command. Lieutenant Bradley had spoken the truth with shaking hands and a breaking voice, but it was enough. Tobias stood in the doorway, watching Ayanna as she stepped outside, her clothes torn, her face streaked with ash and dried blood, but upright. Her people gathered behind her, their numbers thinner now, but their eyes sharp with something new, not rage, not fear, resolve. The baby, still wrapped in a wool blanket, rested in the arms of the youngest girl. Mary Hendricks stood nearby, her own child bundled tight, one arm protectively curled around the infant while she spoke to a marshal. She would be escorted to safety, offered protection, compensation. But none of that could undo what had almost happened. Ayanna approached Tobias. "We lost two," she said. He nodded slowly. "I'm sorry." She glanced back at the house. "But we saved 10. The wind moved gently between them, quieter now, cleaner, as if the land itself had exhaled. "They'll want statements," Ayanna said, "from all of us." "I'll give them what they need," Tobias replied. "Just don't expect me to lie for anyone." Ayanna smiled faintly. "I don't think that's something you know how to do anymore." Tobias looked at the ranch around him, the broken fence, the scorched shingles, the trail of boot prints leading into the blood-soaked earth. This place had been a prison for nearly a decade, and in a single night it had become a battlefield, a reckoning, a graveyard, but maybe also a beginning. The marshals moved efficiently, photographing, cataloging, questioning professionals, hardened by years of seeing the worst men could do. But even they looked shaken by what they'd found here. A military colonel arrested by his own son's word, Apache women armed with blades and memories, a reclusive rancher who turned his homestead into a fortress overnight. By noon, the wounded had been treated, the dead identified, and the remaining soldiers disarmed and bound for transport. Colonel Bradley was taken last, his head held high, but his eyes empty. His career, his legacy, and his illusion of control had all bled out in the mud where Morrison fell. As the wagons rolled away, Ayanna turned to Tobias. "We won't stay." "I know. This land has tasted too much blood." He looked around at the blackened doorframe, the broken shutters, the place where Sarah once hung her wind chimes. "It's not a home anymore." "It was never meant to be," she said gently. "It was a shelter. But the storm has passed." He watched as her women prepared their horses, saddlebags light, eyes fixed northward. "Where will you go?" he asked. "There are relatives in Montana. Safe ground. They will take us in. Let us heal." Tobias nodded, then looked toward the woman standing quietly near the barn, Mary Hendricks, her baby sleeping in the crook of her arm, a bag of belongings slung over one shoulder. "She needs an escort," Ayanna said. "The trail to Denver is long, and there are still men like Morrison out there." Tobias followed her gaze. "Then I'll take her." Ayanna raised an eyebrow. "And after?" He didn't answer immediately. His eyes wandered toward the distant ridgeline where the morning sun burned through mist like a promise. "I head west. Find something worth building. Maybe something worth defending." For a moment they stood in silence. Then Ayanna reached out and clasped his hand. "You saved us?" she said. "No," Tobias replied, voice rough. "You saved yourselves. I just remembered how to help." She gave him the first real smile he'd seen from her, not victorious, not vengeful, just human. Then she turned, mounted her horse, and with a nod to her people, rode northward, toward a horizon that didn't burn. As the dust from the Apache riders faded into the horizon, Tobias turned back toward what was left of his home. The porch creaked under his boots, The door hung loose from its hinges. The fire had long since died. Nothing in the cabin looked untouched. Every surface was marked by struggle, every corner by memory. He stepped inside one last time. On the mantel where Sarah's photograph once sat, now rested the small mirror Ayanna had used to signal the start of the ambush. He picked it up. In its scratched reflection, he saw not a ghost, but a man returned from exile, not cleansed, but changed. Outside, Mary was readying her saddle. She didn't speak as he approached, only gave a quiet nod of gratitude. Her baby stirred slightly, eyes fluttering open in the warm sun. Tobias reached out and gently adjusted the blanket over the child's shoulder, a gesture simple but unfamiliar after so many years alone. "You don't have to do this," Mary said quietly. "I know," he replied, "but maybe I should." They rode out together as the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows over a ranch that had once been a tomb, then a battlefield, and now finally a beginning. Behind them, nothing moved but the wind and the ghosts. Ahead of them, the trail snaked west, dust rising from each hoofbeat, each one carrying Tobias farther from who he had been and closer to the man Sarah might have believed he could become. Years later, travelers spoke of that stormy night with awe and disbelief, of how 9 Apache women and a solitary rancher stood against an army and did not fall. The tale was passed from saloons to stagecoaches, reshaped with every telling. Some called it legend, others a ghost story. But those who lived it knew the truth was quieter, sadder, and far more sacred. Because the real story wasn't about revenge, it was about choice. Tobias Redmont had lived 8 years behind a locked door, mistaking stillness for peace. But when the knock came, not from a threat, but from a plea, he answered. Not because he was brave, but because something deep inside him remembered what it meant to be human. And the women, they were never weak, never victims. They were the storm before the sunrise, the blade behind the prayer. They knew that sometimes survival meant letting the world think you were broken until the moment came to show otherwise. Justice that night did not wear a badge or a uniform. It wore torn fabric, mud-covered boots, a blade passed from mother to daughter. And it spoke not in courtroom oaths, but in choices made in darkness when no one was watching. Sometimes the hardest path is the one back toward the world. And sometimes being human, truly human, means choosing to see others not as threats, but as people worth saving, even when the cost is high. Tobias Redmont didn't save the women. They saved him. And through their courage, a soldier's lie was buried, a colonel's legacy shattered, and a ghost of the West found his way home, not to a place, but to a purpose.